It took me a little over 3 weeks, but I did it. I finally printed an entire Space Marine army. Okay, and this is 3D printed from scratch, every last unit. The bases are 3D printed, like everything's 3D printed. Nothing comes from anywhere else. And it has been an eye-opening experience, and also one of the coolest things that I've ever worked on and ever done. So, let's talk about it. Okay, so before I get into the nitty-gritty of this all, I have to say why I did this project.
Why do you do anything you do?
I have wanted to print an army for forever, but just with everything else that's out there, I've just never had, the actual reason to sit down and do that. Until the awesome people over at Wargamer. Okay, Wargamer Resin. I've talked about this a lot in the last little while. They reached out to me and they said, hey, we're doing this YouTube thing right now where we're getting a bunch of other content creators to print something for someone else. Okay, and so that was what the whole process of this was. And they were like, do you have anyone that you want to make something for? And I immediately thought to my son. He's wanted to play Warhammer for forever, and I have too. I mean, since I was his age, actually. And so I decided now's the perfect time. I'm going to print an army for him, and that will give me the motivation to eventually finish one for myself. I've already printed a Grey Knight Combat Patrol, and so I got to just go a little further with that. But I asked him what he wanted. I thought he was going to do Tyranids. I thought he was going to do Necrons because he loved them both.
That's a little weird.
And he decided he wanted to do Salamanders, which kind of proud of, right? Salamanders are pretty cool, so why not? And so as part of this Make Something for Someone Else campaign, I started printing him an army. And I never used the Wargamer Resin. I honestly thought it was going to be a nightmare compared to the other resins that I've used. But honestly, I didn't change almost anything. There was a couple different things, which if you watch some of my other videos, you can see, curing times and things like that were a little different than I was used to. But ultimately, this ended up being the best resin that I've ever worked with. I showed off how flexible, you can print swords and bend them like they're taffy. And everything I've dropped, nothing's broken. It's been awesome to work with. And so, thanks to them, I started working on this project, and they gave me that little push that I needed. So I'm grateful to them for that. I started working on this 3 weeks ago, and I ran into a bunch of hiccups along the way. I have tons of Warhammer files, gigs, hundreds of gigs of Warhammer files and proxies and things like that. Stuff to be used to play with Warhammer or, other tabletop war games. And so I started looking through what I had, and to my surprise, I had very little
Trash.
Space Marine stuff. And I think I can kind of attribute that to the fact that I'm not a huge fan of the Space Marine, armies. Everyone has their first army that's this is the one I want to do. But if you're in this hobby at all, you've also got but if I have that one done, I'd move on to this one. And if I had that one done, I'd move on to this one. So everyone's got their top 5 armies. And my top 3 have nothing to do with Space Marines. I mean, I guess Grey Knights kind of do, but, I love the Grey Knights. I love the Adeptus Mechanicus. So I just was more focused on those than I was on Space Marines. And so finding these files was hard. And to put the truth out on the table, these are not, one-for-one copies of models. There, some of them are files that are a little older, especially older than 10th edition. Some of them are a little different in size. Some of them are, models that other people put together that are similar but not the same. I kind of decided I wanted to stick to Rule of Cool for this, but I also wanted it to be as close as I could get to the original thing. I wanted to be able to put this down on a table with somebody else and have them be like, oh, I know what this is. I know what these units are. And so that was my goal. And I think that I hit it pretty well. So for those of you looking to do this yourselves, there are a lot of different places you can find files. Thingiverse even has some. The majority that I found were on Cults 3D. I also had the goal in mind to do this for the cheapest that I could possibly do it. And what that meant was using a lot of as many free files as I could find that matched what I wanted. Okay, and so I did a lot of Cults 3D. I did some Thingiverse. The fantastic people on the internet, I had a few of them reach out to me and say, hey, you know, I've got files of this, or this is where you can find files for this. And so that's what I did. I mean, there are so many groups on Facebook that are out there to help you find stuff. Take advantage of it. Take advantage of that. And as always, I talk about Patreon and tribes a lot, but you can find some amazing units that are proxies. They're not, obviously, you know, no one's trying to steal from Games Workshop in this process, but there are a lot of people out there that have similar things to Games Workshop that are just amazing. So look into those. And like I said in my video about what I learned from this process, start gathering files now. If this is something that you plan to do in the future, start gathering them now. Have your flash drive of 100 gigs of Warhammer stuff, so when the time comes to print yours, you have what you need. Because honestly, that was one of the longest processes of this, was just finding the models that I wanted to use. First things first, when it comes to making this army, I don't know a lot about Warhammer. I wasn't about to buy a codex and sit down and flesh out an army, you know, for everything. I honestly wanted just a 2,000 point army that I could get my feet wet with, you know, and play around with. And so it didn't have to be the meta. It didn't have to be anything incredible. So I actually just went online and, you know, looked around for a list that I thought would be fun to bring and had a good variety and looked the way I was hoping for. I'll throw some pictures of it up so you can kind of see what I was going for. And in the end, I was able to get just about everything. I avoided the dropship just because, in all honesty, I didn't think I would ever use one when I was playing. And so I left that out, and I just changed some other things up that I thought would get me to that 2,000 points. But in the end, this is what army I was going for. So now you might be wondering why it took me 3.5, 4 weeks to print this army. And the answer is, I have a full-time job. Doing this channel is not my job. I'd love it to be, but it's not. And so I have very limited time to print. And what I mean by that is every time I do a print, it takes 3-4 hours to print that. And so I'm lucky if I can do 1 to 2 prints a day. And so with the scale of everything that I was doing, it just took longer than that. Now, if I was printing, you know, round the clock on the weekends and things like that, sure, I probably could have busted this out in 1 week. You know, maybe even 1 weekend if I had all the files and everything ready. But like I said, it took me forever just to find stuff. And so it was an undertaking. And I cannot stress enough that if this is something that you want to do, start getting the stuff to do it now. And even slice the files, have them ready. And then when the time comes, you can just round robin them out and print them as fast as you want and be done in a weekend. But I tell you this, when you have an army printed out and it's actually sitting in front of you on the table, you realize just how daunting of a task it is to paint this. It's a miracle to me that these armies get done. But I'm going to keep pushing to hopefully join the people that have accomplished that miracle. So here's the real question. How much did it cost?
Are you rich?
Well, let's add it up. And this is going to go from a perspective of somebody who has nothing and is thinking about doing this. My printer is the Voxelab Proxima 6. Okay? It's a great little printer. It's a little 4K printer. It cost me $160. So, $160. I printed the entire army with 2 bottles of resin. Okay? Wargamer, $60 a bottle, but you're paying for that flexibility and that durability. So you can add $120 on there. Most of the resin I buy is about $20 a bottle. So that's kind of what I wanted to stick to. So that's $40. So 160 plus 40, $200 to print an army. Okay? And then, of course, the thing that I'm leaving out is the tank. Okay? This Land Raider probably would have been about half a bottle of resin by itself. But I printed it on my FDM printer. And my FDM printer, I printed all my bases on the FDM printer and the tank. And overall, I used about 500 grams. That's half of a roll of filament. Okay. And if you want, that printer was $150. So we're at $350. Half of a roll is, $20 for a roll, so $10. So $360 out the door is what it cost me to print this army. And if I were to do it again, all that it would cost me is in my filament and resin. So that means I can print another army for $50. And that's a 2,000 point army. And now everyone's saying, well, if you print the Necrons or if you're Tyranids or, the Imperial Guard, it's going to be a lot more than that. Honestly, the smaller the units are, the more that you can print. I don't think it'll be that much more. Maybe $20. You might need another bottle of resin just because there are so many units. Okay? But not that many. And it depends on how many tanks and things like that you put in your army. But I'm thinking, like, the most expensive army that I can think of, obviously, we're not talking Titans here, people. But I mean, $100 out the door once you have the printers for an army. And in this day and age, when it's going to cost you $100 to get 30 units, that's pretty good. At least I think so. So, what are your thoughts? Is an entire army worth $365? I added $5 on because I forgot that I actually paid for a certain set of models. My Infernus Marines, couldn't find a good file for them, so I ended up paying $5 for a file that was pretty good. And do you feel okay playing against a 3D printed army? And if you're not okay with the 3D printed army, what if it's a 3D printed army that looks exactly like a normal army? Does it then become, you paid the money, you only want to play against people that paid the money? What's the defining factor there? Are you cool to play with anyone just because you want to play the game? Now, I mean, keep in mind, people with 3D printed armies can't play in tournament, at least not Games Workshop tournaments. So there is that downside to this. But if you're looking to just play with your friends or at the local shop and things like that, most people seem to be okay with 3D printed models. Now, is that full armies they're okay with? I don't know. I'd love for you to tell me. I see a lot of people who print units for their armies but have other purchased units and things like that. Where's the dividing line? Are you okay with playing an army that is a little bit of both or all of one? What does it have to be? I'm actually really curious what people think about that. And anyway, if you like this content, over the next year, I'm sure we're going to paint this at some point in time. My son's very excited to do so. And I'll share that journey with you. And if you'd like to see that, please like and subscribe. Here at Pulsegate Games, we are all about making your tabletop gaming experience the best that it can be. Whether that's 3D printing an army, whether that's painting or buying an army, whatever path you choose to go down, we'll be there to support you and hopefully make it a better experience. So, as always, don't spend so much time building, printing, painting your world that you forget to spend a little bit of time in it. Until next time.